Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Liam Rose. I'm an author, mentor, life coach, motivational speaker, evangelist, musician, and activist. In this audio, we're going to be sharing an important message for the Spiritually Helping Other People podcast. This is a very important topic to learn, so I would encourage the listeners to really understand this message and learn about this message. Now, I've been sharing the Spiritually Helping Other People podcast to inspire humanity to go through spiritual change, to help other people, to help the animals, to help the universe, and to learn more about spiritual change, no self, and selflessness. Now, within this audio today, we're going to be sharing a very important message. So, the message is called The Self to No Self. Now, I really want to show the importance of this message and share it to the listeners. Now, there's a big difference between the self and the no self. The self is where the sin, the suffering, the pains, the adversities, the hardships, the disappointments, the challenges and the struggles and the despair of life is. The no self is where there's spiritual freedom, spiritual liberation, spiritual guidance, spiritual understanding, spiritual learning, and freedom from the self. So, in life, it's very important that we actually discover no self and become the no self. Now, if all human beings are living the self, which is the suffering, pain, and adversities in life, which all human beings will go through in their life, regardless if you're in a relationship, if you have children, if you have a job, if you have a career, if you have a business, if you have a big family or a small family, we will all go through suffering, pain, and adversities. This is part of life. This is how all human beings' life are, because we're born into the world of not knowing the world that we've been born into. Our parents may have obviously created us and God has created us, but as a human being we don't know what we're going to experience, what we're going to go through, and how our lives are going to be. So it's important to realize that the self is where the suffering, pain, and adversities is. So we need to overcome the self, which is very, very important. If we live a life for the self, we'll always live in suffering, pain, and adversity, and we'll never be able to change it or overcome it. So, Jesus Christ, Jehovah Buddha, wants us to go through a spiritual change. So, what is spiritual change? Spiritual change is when you change your psyche and your psychological mind. When you change your psyche and your psychological mind, you change yourself as a human being. Now, change is something in the world that people don't understand and people don't go through because they're always living the self. They're always thinking about themselves and worrying about their problems, their challenges, and their circumstances and their situations. So, we need to find a way to overcome the self, to overcome the negativity, the corruption, the destruction, the sin, and just the hardships of what the self can bring to a human being. The way to really overcome the self and to find the no self and to discover no self is we have to go through a spiritual change. So how do we go through a spiritual change? We go through a spiritual change by doing the 5 spiritual practices: prayer, meditation, mindfulness, walking, and journaling. By doing the 5 spiritual practices, we'll go through a spiritual change. If we go through a spiritual change, it means we free ourselves from the suffering, pains, and adversities, the challenges, the disappointments, and the struggles of everyday life. In life, as a human being, we're always going to go through different life experiences, different sufferings, different pains, and different adversities as a human being. But it's very important, if we want to live a life that we're living to our full potential, finding who we really are as human beings, knowing thyself, and discovering no self and selflessness, we need to change the self to no self. So no self is where there's a life that's no more about you. There's no more self within you. It doesn't mean you're not living or you've passed away. It just means that there's no more self within you because you've understood the suffering, pains, and adversities that you've experienced within your life. and now your mind has gone through a renewal process and a spiritual change through actually doing the 5 spiritual practices. So the self can be transformed into the no self, and the self can be changed into the no self. So by doing the 5 spiritual practices, and this has to be done daily, you need to try and do all 5 spiritual practices daily, or choose which spiritual practices best suits you. By going through the process of the 5 spiritual practices, going through the process of the awakening, the spiritual transformation within yourself, then you will discover no self and selflessness. If you discover no self and selflessness, there's no more self within you. You're not going to have the problems of daily life, the suffering of daily life, the pain of daily life, or the adversities of daily life. You will overcome all that to discover the no self and selflessness. Now, it's important to say in this audio, what happens when you go through no self? What is the main important thing when you actually discover the no self? Now, when you discover the no self, what really happens is you start to help other people, help the animals, and help the universe in some way. Because how Jesus Christ, Jehovah, and Buddha works is that your faith and your spirituality has to come into your life before you can help other people, help the animals, and help the universe. If you don't discover your faith and spirituality by going through the 5 spiritual practices of spiritual change, then you don't develop the qualities of compassion, empathy, love, kindness, and generosity towards others. That's why the self will always be the problem in life, no matter how successful a human being is or how poor a human being is. The self is always the problem. So we have to overcome the self to discover the no self and discover who we really are and know that self. So when you discover the no self, you see that life is really about spiritual contributions. That's what life is all about. It's not about who you become as a human being. It's not about your career, your business, your volunteering, your family, your friends, or your loved ones. Life is really about the spiritual contributions you leave in the earth. How many people do you help? How many animals do you help? How are you changing the universe in some way and building the universe? And like I've always said, the no self is a light within yourself. It's the light within you. So if you discover the light within you, which is your true essence of who you are as a human being, because as a human being, we're spiritual energy living in a human form. So as spiritual energy, which is your true essence, the true part of your life, the true essence of who you are as a human being, then you start to help other people, help the animals, and help the universe. That's why in the world today, a lot of people haven't learnt this. They haven't discovered the no self or spiritual change. And when you don't discover the no self and spiritual change, you live a life of the suffering, pains, and adversities, and you never find spiritual freedom and spiritual liberation. Now, Jesus Christ was talking about salvation. The Buddha was talking about spiritual freedom and spiritual liberation. So we can find that in everyday life if we go for a spiritual change. So what becomes the most important thing in life is the spiritual change, right? So the spiritual change is something that we all have to go through as human beings. I'm not saying you can't achieve what you want to achieve, you can't go for your dreams and desires, you can't become who you want to be. You can always do that if that's something that you choose. But the truth is, if you want to find spiritual freedom, spiritual transformation, spiritual liberation, and spiritual awakening, then you need to develop the 5 spiritual practices: prayer, meditation, mindfulness, walking, journaling. And when you develop the 5 spiritual practices, then you need to make sure you start the work of helping other people, helping the animals, and helping the universe. Now there's 5 levels of helping other people. Level 1, volunteering, the good level, in helping others. Level 2, jobs, careers, and employment, the great level in helping others. Level 3, business and entrepreneurship, the highest level in helping others. Level 4, faith and spiritual, the spiritual level in helping others. And then level 5, spiritually helping other people, who helping other people, the teaching level in helping other people. Now, the self will always be the problem in life, because people can't overcome their life experiences, their circumstances, and their situations. So the self is always going to be a problem in life. So that is the main problem in life at the moment. That is the reason why the world is the way it is. It's very self-centered. It's not compassionate. It's not empathetic. It's not loving. It's not kind, and it's not generous. So we need to overcome the self to discover the no self. And when there's no self, there's no more you. There's no more I, there's no more me, there's no more my, there's no more belonging to something, or identifying with something, or laboring something, or the thoughts and the feelings that are in your mind. When there's no self, that means freedom from the self, freedom from everyday living, and this is a very important thing to discover. So my encouragement is, if you really, really, really want to go for a spiritual change and find who you really are as a human being, find the light within yourself, right, and discover the light within yourself, then the spiritual change becomes the most important thing. And the only way you can go for a spiritual change is when you do the 5 spiritual practices: prayer, meditation, mindfulness, walking, journaling. The 5 spiritual practices is how you go for a spiritual change. So the spiritual change becomes the most important thing. You need to develop yourself as a human being and go for a spiritual change. When you go for a spiritual change, your life always changes, and you'll discover that your psyche and your psychological mind will change. So it's very, very important that we actually change the self to the no self. So the no self is where spiritual contributions is. You'll help other people, you'll help humanity, you'll help the universe, and you'll help the world to become a better place. So go for a spiritual change, do the 5 spiritual practices, do the 5 levels of helping other people, and go through the process of spiritual change. Okay, thank you for listening now. I hope you have a good day. Bye now. Thanks. Bye.